Hey everybody, this is Pierre Quinn, and you're listening to episode number 63 of the Leading While Green podcast, where my mission is to help you live, learn, and lead with confidence. On this episode of the podcast, I have a conversation with former TV anchor, Emmy award-winning broadcaster, and pioneer of the Journey Strong movement, Chuck Gaidica. Chuck and I talk about his career on television and what it means to have second half significance. It's an amazing conversation, so listen up. Now, before we jump into the conversation with Chuck Gaidica, I want to thank you so much, each and every one of you, for supporting the Leading While Green podcast. You're posting it on your social, you're emailing links to your friends, you have reviews on iTunes. I mean, everything that you're doing, especially listening right now, is helping this podcast grow exponentially. And you're helping me get this message of what it means to be an effective leader around the world. And I want to thank you. And I'm going to ask you to keep doing it. If you haven't left a review on iTunes, hit pause and do it now. The hundreds of you who listen every single month, you owe it to yourself to let somebody else know about this podcast and the journey that we're on. And one of the best ways to do that is with an iTunes review. Now, I am super excited about today's conversation with Chuck Gaidica. Now, I grew up in the Detroit area, and I used to watch Chuck on TV. He was an on-air personality in the Detroit area, and I knew when I grew up that I wanted to be an influencer like Chuck. And in our conversation today, we talk about careers, we talk about faith, we talk about personal journeys, struggles, pivots, and what it means to live a life of significance. It's a great conversation. Trust me, you're going to want to take notes on this one. Here's my chat with Chuck Gaidica. On this episode is Mr. Chuck Gaidica. Chuck, thanks for joining me today.
Hey, it's good to be with you, Pierre. Thank you.
So, Chuck, you have this amazing list of titles: Explorer Scout, Keynote Speaker, Baby Boomer, Adventurer, Ambassador, Dad, Meteorologist, Batman Nut.
Yeah, that's me.
Director, Grandfather, Author, Emmy Award winner, Nonprofit Board President. I mean, you've run the gamut and you lived a really, really full life. Take us back some years. Take us back to maybe childhood, or how did you know? Because I think most people know you most notably for the field of communication and news and broadcasting. But take us to some of those early periods in your life.
You know, thanks first of all for having me on. I grew up in Chicago, inner city Chicago. So even though I've been in Detroit most of my professional life, I grew up as a kid in Chicago. And Pierre, frankly, I think I was programmed to be a doctor.
Okay.
And every time I remember there was a little bar in the neighborhood, in Chicago, inner city Chicago, it's either there's an old style sign on the corner or there's a hot dog place. You have to pick one that you want. And I remember my dad would walk past, the local pub, and somebody would say, "What does little Chucky want to be?" And I would say, "I want to be," and he would squeeze my hand and he would say, "A doctor." And he meant well, because I think he thought that's the guy who makes the money. My dad was a factory laborer. And so I grew up, and thank God I had the grades. And so I went through a kind of a college prep high school and got nearly a free ride to Loyola University, Lakeshore campus, in pre-med and pre-dent. And I dropped out in the first half of my first semester.
Wow. And
so I kid I've got 5 children. I kid my children that I'm now capable of operating on them with a spork. That's the training I got, So I'm now kind of confused, and I'm wandering, and I go to work at Walgreens as an assistant store manager. And I'm a trainee, I'm basically a stock boy with a key to the safe. And I had this manager, I remember his name to this day, Mr. Vigon. And Mr. Vigon calls me into the back, the storeroom. And he says, "Chuck, sit down, pull up a milk crate." And I think, oh man, I'm getting fired, And he says to me, "What do you want to do when you grow up?" I said, "I don't really know. I'm a little confused. I thought it was medicine." And he said, "Listen, Walgreens is a great company. I work for it. I'm a manager. You are looking at about as far as you're going to get. So I see something in you,
Hmm.
and I think you should consider other opportunities. And Pierre, I'm telling you, that moment was one of the first pivots in my life that
Hmm.
occurred because of kind of like Boy Scouting. Somebody took the time to sit down with me and just share. How long would that have taken? A couple minutes of wisdom.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah.
So, man, this is really good, especially for the members that comprise most of my listening audience. Those emerging leaders just starting off in career, just having
Mm.
some modicum of responsibility, and kind of speak to maybe the individuals who are struggling. They were like you. They were in college. They picked a major because of the projected salary or because this is what their parents wanted, but they kind of feel inside, or someone has said to them, this isn't where you're supposed to be. And they're trying to make a decision whether or not to follow that pivot or stay where they are. Kind of speak to that for us.
Well, in the process of going through this journey, 18, 19 years old, I'm kind of wandering. I mean,
Hmm.
I was literally walking along Lakeshore Drive in January in Chicago, getting hit by waves off of Lake Michigan. To be fair, I
Hmm.
don't think I was really contemplating suicide, but I was just lost. I didn't know what
Yeah.
was going on. And to really say that at that moment, my life changed. I know I prayed about it. I know I started to think more deeply, like, what do I do? And I think so many of my friends that I've seen in life, to your point about getting a career, going to school, getting a career, then all of a sudden you find the love of your life, you have kids, life happens,
Hmm.
and you wake up someday. And I don't care if it's at age 25, 35. In my case, it was about age 45. Then if you fast forward, where there's this knock on your heart and you're
Mm.
like, oh, man, is this all there is? Is this why I'm here? So I started asking the same questions I asked early in life, probably even earlier, about age
Mhm.
10.
Mhm.
Why am I here? Is there a God? What am I supposed to do when I grow up? Who should I marry? What should I be when I grow up? And then I got to about age 45 at the top of my career. And
Yeah.
the age is academic. Somebody listening right now could be going through this at 30 years old.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
started asking again, why am I here? Not so much, is there a God, because I'm a believer in God, but not so much, who will I marry again, because I am married for 37 years. But
Mhm.
I start asking these big questions, and I think a lot of us can relate to that somehow something is missing, and we wonder, like, is this really what life is all about?
What's interesting about this, Chuck, is that as you just mentioned, you were at the top of your career. And now let me help our listeners with a little bit of my background.
Mm.
I hesitated to send you that email, and we've been kind of working back and forth for almost a year to have this conversation. I hesitated to send you the email because part of me saw you as a hero.
Oh, well, thanks.
I grew up in Pontiac,
Yeah.
and we watched Channel 4, and I would, watch the anchors, the personalities. And I remember growing up watching you on television and having a section of my life where I said, okay, when I grow up, I want to be on TV like Chuck and communicate to the world. So, here, being along, growing up watching you, hearing that you were at the top of your career. And I think that's what may throw caution to some people. Emmy Award winning, known around the city and around the country at the top of your career. But then you kind of leaned into that nudge that said there's something
Mhm.
more for you. What how did you get past those voices that said, Chuck, you're at the top of your career. You have tons of credibility. You have a decent life. You've made a name for yourself. Just kind of shake that off and keep doing what you're doing. And maybe even people of faith who said, God will understand. What kept you pressing ahead and leaning into the nudge instead of leaning away?
So I meet my wife in somewhere around 79, 80. We get married. She married me, Pierre, on an IOU. I had no money. I had nothing. I gave her an IOU for a ring, and then the next place was J.C. Penney's, for a little, whatever that is, a chip of a diamond. And
Yeah.
so it's going to be 38 years next year. But my career takes off. My very first three jobs: Evansville, Indiana; Cape Girardeau; Little Rock, Arkansas. That's all within about 3 years.
Hmm.
And then I get to Detroit, and I got to the CBS station in Detroit. And within a year, I'm substituting on the CBS Morning News in New York. the local NBC station, the one you mentioned, Channel 4, sees me. They come after me. It's kind of like professional athletics. If you see somebody on another team, you try to acquire them,
Yeah.
And so I move over to Channel 4, and I'm there for 32 years full time. And really, it was in my 40s where I started to get this feeling, which has been coined halftime. And God willing, I've got another half. I don't think the math works out, but that you start to get these feelings of like, what is important in life? And then I really jumped off the plank at age 56. I retired from full-time TV weather, and I think a number of things happened. Number one, I was blessed with a wife who I kept in touch with in the entire process. And I cannot tell you how important this is, that if you're going to have not a midlife crisis, this is vastly different than, honey, I need a Corvette. Corvettes are nice, but I'm just saying this is really profound. If you don't attempt to, because sometimes it doesn't just align, to get your spouse on track with your internal journey is one thing, but your external journey, and sometimes they're not in sync, get that spouse on track. So here's what I used to say, and I look back and it's kind of funny, but it really helped me. I saw my friends and my kids' friends saying off to the side, what's wrong with your dad? I mean, he's got the best job in the city and he's doing great. And I started saying out loud, I am having the most fun being confused I have ever had. And I would laugh about it, but it was lethargic, because then when people would ask Susan, what's up with Chuck? She'd say, he's having the most fun being confused he's ever had, So there was that part, but at some point, Pierre, I had to, there's a book written, and I forget who the author is, but it talks about whispers and nudges. You use the word nudges. Whispers and nudges, having the guts to respond. When God nudges you, sometimes it's a harder elbow than you'd like.
Yeah.
You really have the guts to respond. Steve Harvey wrote a book called Leap, and this, have you read it? I don't know if you've seen it.
I've seen it.
There's a video. He was just riffing during a commercial break on Family Feud, and I love watching him. Susan and I watch him all the time. And so I Google it. I buy his book. Basically, he says we all get to this point in our life where we get to the edge of the precipice, the edge of the cliff, and you want to change your life or move on to a new career, and you just don't do it. You get stuck. We all know why. Just leap. Just lean into it and go. And I'll tell you that it does take guts, and I'm not saying I'm anything special, but I had to make a conscious decision. Am I going to leave the best job I've ever had, or will I let them make it so easy that I just keep showing up and phoning it in? And the latter was not a good option.
You, in your bio, it says you have a certificate in second half significance, and you mentioned this idea of being at what some people categorize as halftime. Talk to us about, I mean, most of us have never heard about a certificate in second half significance. Talk to us about the journey to go in that direction, and then what that meant for this kind of confusing period in your life, and if it brought any clarity for you.
Well, it brought a lot of clarity. So I was at age 50. I'm still in TV news and still doing some history and leadership. So part of my master's is in leadership. I've always been a student of leadership. I lived and studied in the Holy Land for a month, and that was while I was still doing full-time news. So I come out of that 4 years later, and I left TV news at 56, and I went on staff at a large mega church here in the Detroit area. And I thought that's where God was leading me. And I think there are reasons for all of this path that I've been on. But while I'm there, I put on a baby boomer conference. Admittedly, it was for people who were about 50 to 65.
Nice.
We get 900 people. I mean, there is a fire out there. And it's not just boomers. I had a guy who's 35 who walked up to me. He said, Chuck, I'm a firefighter. I started when I was 21, 22 years old. I've been carrying 100 pounds of gear up and down ladders my whole career. I can't do it anymore. I'm 35 and I have to reinvent myself. So this is not just about, guys like me who are old. So I put on this thing and I invited a speaker from the Halftime Institute. This is a book that was written by Bob Buford, who just sadly passed away this year. I was in Dallas at the Institute the day after he passed. He wrote this book called Halftime, Moving Your Life from Success to Significance. And while there's a lot to that book, I have to tell you, it spoke to me right away, and it speaks to a lot of people. Whatever success is, it doesn't mean you're a retired football player or weather guy or whatever it is. Whatever success has been for you, what is significance? What can it be for you? And that's the motion that we should all be moving toward in our life, even if we continue to work. I'm not saying everybody should quit their job and go to work at a church. I'm just saying, what about where you're planted? What can you do? So I then wind up getting invited to the Halftime Institute. I decided to take them up on the offer of going out to Pepperdine University at Malibu. I mean, somebody had to go.
Right.
And I don't know how kids go to school there, man. They walk out and they see the ocean every day. And so I'm there for 3 days, and I get the certificate in second half significance, which I guess, it's kind of ironic. I'm still trying to figure out my own, and I'm hopeful, I'm prayerful that if nothing else, I can be an encourager to others. Not so much a coach. I don't really do professional coaching, but I sit with guys I know, and we talk about this journey they're on. And if I can encourage people that, you can come through it, and there are a few tricks to it, but you can do it. Everybody can.
So was your time at Pepperdine the catalyst for now this new platform and support that you have called Journey Strong? Give us a story of that and how was that developed?
So Journey Strong is really kind of the name or the brand, if you will. I don't have anything that I sell. I'm doing some podcasts. I just did one on health and wellness for Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan. It's still going on. And so I've got some things I'm doing, but I'm doing a lot of professional speaking, and I've spoken to a lot of financial planning groups, which is interesting to me. They wanted me more of a motivational message to move their clients toward considering what is your legacy, where do you want to give your money away? What breaks your heart? And that's part of the halftime journey, is trying to dig deep, and this is really hard stuff. What is your passion? What would you do, Pierre, for the rest of your life even if you didn't get paid for it? So some people would say, well, I would work on human trafficking. I mean, that, I would go dig wells in Africa. I love zoo animals. Whatever your thing is. And I think that's really hard. So part of that 3-day intensive at Pepperdine is creating a personal mission statement, trying to discover who you are, why you're wired the way you are, taking a strengths finder test. I think that's a $20 investment. I have no skin in the game on that. I don't have any stock in them, but I think it helps to show you a little bit about how you're wired. And I'll bet a lot of people who could be listening have already taken that test at work, And so what I did is I kind of pivoted again, and Journey Strong has become something where I'm working with groups of people. I've spoken this week to a major church conference. I've spoke to a non-church group of 800 or 900 60-year-olds and older in St. Clair Shores, Michigan. So I'm doing a lot of that kind of stuff, and that's what Journey Strong is. And maybe there'll be a radio segment, and I'm working on all kinds of different ideas.
Now, we're both persons of faith. Can you share with us a time where, and maybe it was the transition period, and if not, a time or some times in your life where you really had to, tightly embrace your faith, and that the hope that you had to get you through whatever difficult section of life you were enduring at the time?
Well, it's still a journey, and I that's why I looked for that name for what I'm trying to explain to people, and the word journey popped up. It really is true. I'm not done, and it's still not completely together. Even though my life is generally running at a pretty nice level with kids and our third grandchild. All the stuff that you try to get the pieces in place. So I'm leading trips to Israel now, maybe once every year and a half or so, which is a joy. But this idea of faith to me is important, because men and women like you and I who have a faith life also typically want to do good in the world. We're charged to do good things, right, biblically. And I ignored the advice of the book Halftime, written by Bob Buford, and even my own personal coach. And here's what I want to say to that. I think we all want to do good, and sometimes people like me, I won't include you in this, think that the only way to save the world, quote unquote, is to run into the church or ministry and go on staff somewhere. That's the only way to do it. And I learned a bit the hard way that maybe because I'm entrepreneurial or otherwise, I'm not quite wired to run at the speed or the dialed down speed sometimes. And I think that being on staff at a church for me was an eye-opening discovery. And so I just encourage people who are listening that whether you're new to faith, your faith life, whether you have strong faith life your entire lifetime, really consider that whatever your halftime moment is at age 40, 60, I've had people who are 70 plus, Pierre, who are saying to me, hey, I'm going to retire. I am scared to death. And I'm thinking, that's a really interesting thing, because if God blesses all of us with an extra 20, 30, 40 years of life after we retire now, not because you're wealthy, just because, what in the world? How much golf can you play? And so faith for me has been the anchor, and I'm still a broken man. I still have my doubts. I still get stressed. And at the same time, if I don't keep my eye there, and the other thing that I've learned for me, and it's because I'm a bit type A, I need to listen better. I need to turn down the volume of emails and texts and stuff and kids and all that stuff that's going on. So I think what I relate to the most is this notion, and maybe this will encourage leaders, you've probably spoken about this, being a servant leader. There's no limit to what a man can do or where he can go if he doesn't mind who gets the credit. And I'll tell you what, that drives me a lot. I really don't need the glory in this. And I think if more leaders, even the ones that we see in our world today, let's just let somebody else get the credit and just high five behind the scenes if that's your MO. But let's just help, get down on bended knee for a kid and don't tell anybody. Just do good stuff. And that really was what came out of halftime for me. My mission statement is, I want to do good and encourage others to do the same to glorify God's kingdom. That's it, period. So right now, if some guy calls me and says, Chuck, I got a business idea, let's do bit, bit, bit. And I'm like, man, if it doesn't fit in that in that circle, I just don't have time. I don't have time.
So how have you navigated this and what we typically classify as the marketplace? Sometimes people ask you to speak and they read your bio and they may say things like, well, okay, we know you're a person of faith or you go to church or whatever, but let's not talk about that, or stay with these points. This is a business event. It's open. We don't want to offend anyone. How have you navigated your faith in the areas in which you've been called to lead?
So I have, I've learned some valuable lessons, and I was just at a one-day intensive speakers conference with Josh Linkner, who's a venture capitalist here in Detroit. He's a best-selling author, and he had a lot of Speakers Bureau leaders there. And I walked up to this guy that has a Christian side to the business and a secular side to the business, and he's a Christian as well. And he said to me, I'm just going to tell you straight up, if you're a Christian trying to speak at all conferences, you're going to have a problem trying to get booked all the time. And okay, so that's an eye-opener. It's not something that's unexpected to me, but I'll tell you, I've lived this. When I left full-time TV news, I was in the marketplace here for 37 years. Very rarely, unless I was being glib, and I would say, on the air, something like, I get paid to outguess God. I never came on the air and said I believe in Jesus, or praise, touch your TV and say hallelujah. I mean, it wasn't my, it's not my role. When I retired, I got more than one message, and one email stands out. I'm paraphrasing. I watched you my entire life, and I always knew there was something different. And I thought, well, what? I mean, you're watching me on a flat screen or a little box, and you could tell that I was trying to be the salt and light of the world, is in essence what this person was saying. And I'm not trying to brag. I'm just saying, if we don't walk the walk and talk the talk first, and not be the person who others, leaders, and the people who work for us as leaders look up to and think there is something different about that person. I don't even have the same faith. I don't even have faith. And when I'm in trouble and I need somebody who doesn't want credit, I'm going to that guy. I think that's the person we should all strive to be, no matter our faith. And so for me, it's just been a matter of walking the walk and talking the talk first. And then if you want to sit down with a beer or a cup of coffee, have a theological discussion, I've got a little training. So let's go,
I remember teaching a business communication course several years ago, and while I was in seminary,
Mm.
and at the end of the course, it was last day talking to the students, and someone asked me, "Well, what do you do?"
Yeah.
No one had asked me that question this entire semester, and I said, "Well, I am in class. I'm in a graduate program right now to study to become a pastor." And about three or four individuals in the class said, "Oh, that
Hmm.
makes so much sense."
Hmm.
I said, "What does that mean?" And they said, "Well, the way that you have interacted and dealt with us, especially in times of crisis and confusion in the classroom, it would make sense that this is your career." But I think going back to what you were saying before, sometimes we assume or we've allowed this idea of professional ministry to hijack the notion of calling, to
Hmm.
say that you can only have influence, faith influence or spiritual influence in the professional role of a pastor. But you've clearly displayed as a communicator and as a news person, you've been communicating your faith and people have seen it, even though you've never said it. And I think that that puts all the rest of us on notice that living day-to-day life and not having a certificate or a title of pastor or ministry leader should not prevent you from living out your calling.
I think you're absolutely right. And I remember back in the day, these old TV commercials that used to show a mom or a dad, I forget, smoking a cigarette. I mean, I'm going back maybe to the 70s. And then
Hmm.
their young kids came around the side, the fender of the car, and saw mom and dad sneaking a smoke. And the basic story, the message was, you are going to influence your kids by your actions, not just your words.
Hmm.
And I think that's really important. People are looking at us, and I can't tell you how many men and women I come across in my life who, like me, can be planted and bloom where they're planted. Christians have this phrase, marketplace ministry. Well, that's a churchy way of looking at it, but
Yeah.
wherever you are, if you can be a servant leader, that's important. And I think the other piece of this is that as we all venture through our life, we've got to be prepared to ask some serious questions, and they're not all financially, the answers we're going to get are not all going to be the things we want to hear about. Like, well, are you prepared to move on to a different life? When you feel a calling, I'm not saying to ignore it, but I
Hmm.
think too many people I meet think that the only way to do this, you're right, is to get some kind of a title or degree. And so for me, I'm glad. I don't know about you. I'm glad I got the training. I'm
Hmm.
glad that I was
Absolutely.
on staff at a church, and then I said to another church, I'll give you a season as an executive director, and that ended in March. But I've really come to discern, and I think God is leading me into places where I don't need to be on staff at a church. I just need to be in dialogue and turn down the volume and listen and wait for that whisper nudge. And now I'm waiting for the next, hey, go over there and leap, go do that thing.
Mhm. Chuck, where can we keep up with you? Social media, website, all of the stuff. Give us the shameless plugs so that we can click on it. I'll put everything in the show notes so that people can follow you and your work.
Well, thanks. Basically, the best place is just my website. And Gaidica, trust me, is not the easiest name to remember, but chuckgaidica.com. So it's Chuck and then GAIDICA.com. I'm on all social media and I'm blogging. And so a lot of the stuff that I'm doing is it kind of runs as a conduit through all those places, even with Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan. They've got me in their spot. I think I'm going back. I mean, you grew up here. So for 30 years, I've been part of the Thanksgiving Day Parade,
Oh,
America's
listen,
Thanksgiving Day Parade. So
classic Chuck
if,
Gaidica.
if they call me and put me in, it's kind of like what I say to God every day, put me in, coach.
Yeah.
So if I'm going in, I'll be in that in November. And, I'm just, I'm traveling. I'm actually gone for 10 days, leading a trip of 55 people to the Holy Land, which if I could do that in the fabric of my life, lead trips and just be leader makes it sound like that's what I'm waiting to do. I really to just kind of walk with people, just
Mhm.
be a shepherd and just kind of show them and open their eyes to the history and the geography and the geology. It's just an amazing trip. So, but chuckgaidica.com, pal, that's the best place, I think.
Chuck, thanks for spending a few moments today talking about life and leadership and your journey and the steps that we can take to journey strong. I know I'm better for it, and our audience will be better for it as well.
I appreciate you. Thank you so much, Pierre.
Great conversation with Chuck Gaidica. I told you it was going to be a good one. Head over to chuckgaidica.com and check out all that Chuck is doing, especially with the Journey Strong movement. He's got some great stuff going on, and he would appreciate your support. Now, I would appreciate your support too, in the form of maybe a 5-star review on iTunes and some comments. Maybe you can text this, tweet it, put it all over your social, email somebody, call them on the phone and let them know about the Leading While Green podcast and how we're bringing together leadership consultants, coaches, authors, influencers, famous people, and regular people like you and me who are going on a journey just like you are. And this podcast may just be the boost, may just be the spark, the insight, or the lessons you need to keep going in the right direction. That's all I got for this episode. So until next time, take care and God bless.